The 168-acre parcel of land that's the setting of this homicide case sits just north of Sorrento, Florida, off Lake Norris Road. David Ricketson lived in a mobile home nestled in the middle of a large, wooded property. He'd only the previous summer built a nursery where he grew hydroponic lettuce. He had also hired a man named Ed Bloom as a building contractor. But by the time David brought in what would be the last harvest of his life, Bloom was already gone from the project, and according to David, with about $20,000 of his money.
Now, David wasn't drinking at all that day. He didn't want to drink, and he was going to the gym the next day. We went up to the trailer, and I said, David, I'm going to run up in Sorrento and go to the bank and get some money and get some beer. And I went up and got $10 out of the bank and bought a 6-pack of beer. And I came back, and David had come out of the shower and he had his gray bathrobe on. And he was sitting down watching TV, and this was about 4:15 because we finished watching Three's Company. And we watched that to 4:30 and then watched something else and talked in between. So I drank a beer, and then I said, I'm going to go on home. And I left about 4 to 5, I think. I left right before the program that we were watching was on. And I said, I'll be at it about 6:30. I said, and he said, all right, I'm going to go to the gym. I said, if I'm not here, then just go on down and start cutting or whatever. And I didn't expect him to be there. I mean, he a lot of days prior to that was going to the gym but never made it. But that day, he convinced me that he was going and he wasn't drinking. So he made him a big bowl of salad. And it was in a big Tupperware type bowl. And he was mixing that up and asked me if I wanted it. And I said, no, so I'm going to go home.
Okay, between the time you were there, 4:15 to that around 5 o'clock, did he receive any phone calls?
Yeah.
John mentioned a call from one of David's female friends, and he had quite a few. This woman was named Jeanette. She and David had dated years earlier.
She was planning on coming out Wednesday night, and said, David, if you're there, I'd like to come out tonight rather than Wednesday night. He said, oh, I don't want her coming out tonight. And so he didn't answer that.
Trouble had descended upon Ricketson's nursery in the months leading up to his last day, like the early morning fog that met John Bruton, a longtime friend of David's and now employee, as he made his way up the long dirt driveway toward David's house. The emergency call to police came only minutes after John arrived. First on scene was a patrolman, who was met at the gate by John in his Jeep. He led the officer back down the long path that served as a driveway that he had earlier entered for work, certainly not expecting what he would find.
Upon opening an all-aluminum door on the west side of the trailer, from a large wooden porch, the living room is viewed. To your right is the kitchen with one light on. There are no other lights on in the trailer. Directly ahead is a color television which is on. A VCR sits on the floor and is on, but not playing. There is no volume on the TV. There is a shotgun behind a dog food bag on the kitchen floor, and a .22 caliber rifle on an end table to the left of the victim, about 10 feet. There are no other weapons observed in this area of the residence. The victim was sitting in a PVC chair, with its back against the west wall of the room. The chair is directly to the left of the entrance door. Victim was dressed in a gray terry cloth bathrobe and no other clothing. There is a large bullet hole in the middle of his forehead and another in the area of his right temple behind the right eyebrow. On the carpet to the right of the chair is a large pool of coagulated blood. Next to the victim, to his right on the floor, are 2 socks, 1 fly swatter, and a remote channel changer. Most have blood on them. The victim was sitting upward in his chair, which has cushions. There were no indications of forcible entry. On the top railing running along the west side of the deck was some sand, as if someone had climbed over this rail or placed a foot on it. and on the ground next to the west side deck, with its legs straight up, is a TV dinner tray matching the one next to the television. While waiting for the Criminal Investigations Bureau, Ryder spoke with the complainant, John Bruton. When the complainant left at 5 p.m., the victim was dressed the same as he was found, and he was sitting in the same chair watching television.
What time did you come to work?
Okay, I got there. When I was pulling up to David's trailer, I looked at my little radio, or clock radio on my radio, and it said 6:16. And I looked in the trailer, and from my Jeep, I parked it outside, and the only light that was on was the TV. And I could see the changing of the colors on the TV would change the color in the house, and I thought it was strange that he often watches TV, but there's lights on, and there would be a light on back in the bathroom, usually towards the hallway. The hallway light doesn't work, and he usually has the light on in the living room. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange, but then I didn't think too much about it. And I opened the door. I saw David slumped over on his right shoulder, his right arm, and I saw all this red stuff, and it was, dark, just illuminated by the TV, and there was all this red stuff on his arm, and on the floor was a puddle of it, and there was a cup laid over there. And I didn't look at his head or anything at first. My immediate reaction was maybe David made him some kind of a red drink and it spilled or something. But then I kind of looked at his head, and I walked around, and I flicked the light on because it's right to the right of the door, and I saw this big hole in the front of his head, between his eyes. And I said, oh no. And I looked around, and I don't know why I thought this, because I never would think David would commit suicide. I never thought David would be shot either, but my first reaction was I looked around for a gun on the floor, and there wasn't any. And I don't know, I guess I kind of was in shock. I still couldn't believe it. I walked around and looked on the side again, and looked at the side of his head, and I went over to his address book, and Clyde's, I couldn't find Clyde's name in it. So I saw Ricky in there, so I called Ricky. And I said, Ricky, David's been shot.
Hey, do you know the workings of the telephone recorder?
The only thing I knew about that is I could push redial if I dialed a number, and that was it. And David always worked the phone messages and everything.
Did you shoot David?
No, I did not.
Did y'all get in an argument that night? You come back out and get in an argument again? Come back out to his apartment?
No, sir.
His trailer? Get in an
No,
argument? Okay. Do you have any idea, gut feeling, what shot him?
The only thing I can think of.
Craig. The only thing John can think of is Craig. Craig was the name that was at the top of everyone's suspect list. Craig was a high school buddy of David's who had gotten in a fight with him years earlier and had held a grudge about it since. He told everyone he thought someone was poisoning him. You're going to hear more about how concerned friends of David's were by Craig's odd behavior.
I know just from listening and talking to him out there at the trailer, he's got me convinced that he's crazy, and maybe that's what he's trying to do, but he thinks people are trying to poison him, and he's told me that too, and I think it's absurd. But he said one time he went up to Atlanta and checked in a motel that he'd never been to in his life, and got in there and started feeling stuff, and I guess feeling the curtains and this and that, and said they've already been here, they poisoned this place. And then he told me that. And when somebody tells you something like that, I don't think they're just too doggone stable.
He describes an instance where Craig came out to the property.
He came out, and David paid him back for the .38 pistol that he just kind of hawked or loaned to him as collateral.
This is a .38 that Craig had taken from David as collateral when he loaned him $200. Multiple witnesses say that David never got it back.
And he bought an 8 ball of cocaine from him, powder. And and I asked him, because he had a big envelope full of money sticking out of his back pocket, and he had $7,000 in cash in his back pocket.
The investigator asked how long ago it was that Craig showed up to David's and got paid back, and he thinks it was 3 to 4 weeks before the murder. So that would be sometime around the end of January or the beginning of February.
I would say probably around 4 weeks prior to his murder, around that time.
Okay.
Maybe three to four.
Can you describe that?
I've never seen it. He didn't have it with him, and he never gave it to David.
Give David the gun back.
No,
Is that it?
no, he didn't have it. He said he didn't have it, and he said he was going to bring it back. And then that 2-week period of time that I was gone, they come back out. And I said, "Did you get your gun back?" He said, "No, he didn't have it." And he said, "I ordered some steroids from him." And so he was trying the gun out and some steroids, for his weightlifting.
John stayed out at the Ricketson property for a little while after David died to help the family with the nursery. But John had a drug problem, and friends had been concerned that they had been using crack cocaine out there together in the weeks leading up to David's murder.
Now, I'll say this. There was a barbecue, and this is one of the times David sent me with $50 into town to buy some coke. I just bought some crack and brought it back, and that was late at night at the barbecue.
This is John's ex-wife.
He's been living in various places. He's living at his mom's now. And the only reason he was at my house during the time that David was killed was because my still my name.
The Jeep that John was driving was in her name.
And I've been trying to sell it because he hadn't been able to make payments on it. So I've had it in the paper. So I said, well, you might as well stay here because I need the car to show. And we're so close to David's, it would save you time going back and forth to work. And so that's why he was there during that time.
The investigator asked her if she knew of any friction between John and David, and she said no.
And he just loved it out there as far as I knew. He loved working in with the lettuce and all that stuff. As a matter of fact, Tuesday they picked about 1,500 heads, and he left, about a minute or so after 6 Wednesday morning, because he said that David wanted him there early so they could pick the other 4,000 heads.
Then he asked her right out, did John shoot David?
Not that I'm aware of. Now, I know that
She said she knows that John was home by 5:30.
5:30, because the only reason I know for sure was because he called my mother-in-law, and she was on her way out to a banquet for the Barnett Bank. She was the vice president of the bank and now retired. And she talked to him then, and who I work with, her husband is also in the sheriff's department, had called my house probably around 6, because she knows I get home around 6 and I hadn't gotten home yet. When I got at my house that night when I got home, that was probably about 20 to 7. I was late that night. I had called and I called her back. And then he usually gets up at 5 and I get up at 5:30. And he was all dressed and ready to go to work. And he left about a few minutes after 6, because it just takes a few minutes to get over there. We're about 13 miles from where David lives. And he called me at 20 after 6 to tell me that David was dead.
This is David's father.
I understand you own all the property.
Right.
That's correct. Okay, who did you contract with to build the property, to build the greenhouse?
Greenhouse, it was,
That would be Ed Bloom.
he has a greenhouse, and David got interested in it. And so he talked him into letting him build a bigger and a better plant than what he...
How was the financial end of it set up? Did David handle the money?
No,
Did you
David
handle
had nothing to handle money. It was set up when they started. I gave them $56,000 to start. And then like when one part is done, they get a draw. It's part like the greenhouses are put up and then the cement. And I gave him a draw. And I gave him the draw for the cement through CBS. And then I come to find out he didn't pay for it. He still owes them.
How much was the total cost? What the contract for on the greenhouse?
The total contract was for $190,000, but I've spent about $30,000 over that. I've spent over $200,000.
Clyde verifies that David didn't handle the finances. It was Ed, and it was his job as the project contractor to pay various vendors out of the account that Clyde had set up for building expenses. But Ed, apparently, wasn't paying all the bills. a lien was put on the Ricketson property in October of 1989 for services rendered by CBS Industries. The summons on that lien on the Ricketson property would not be served to Ed at his home until January of 1990, the month before David's homicide. And there was a judgment rendered against Ed Bloom in court on the same date that David Ricketson was killed. Now, the audio is more redacted than the transcript here, so I will read what Clyde said.
He wasted money. He can't account for $25,000, and I'm going to do something about that. I have the canceled checks, where I gave them the money. One, the money was deposited to the business that was going to build it, which was Future Farms. Now all the checks were deposited into that account where they could draw from it, but there is this $25,000 that wasn't deposited to the account. It was deposited in his personal account. He has used that money for something else. There is going to be a case over that.
The he in question is Ed Bloom.
Would he have a grudge against David? You know?
His brother would. His brother came out there one time when they were building it, and David said he was either high on some drugs or whatnot.
David was in a really bad mood. Something had fouled up on the greenhouse, and he had to bust a hole that big around through the concrete and get down in it and fix it and all. And this was after he'd fixed the hole and he was concreting it up. Come up there to put his foot in it. David looked up at him and said, "Quit doing that." And he smoothed it and he put his foot in it again. And David smoothed it and he did it one more time, and David come up off the floor and laid him out. When I stopped him, he about half killed him in about 30 seconds before I could stop him.
Okay, you haven't seen him since then?
Probably up in Connecticut or New York or wherever. In fact, he stole some tools from his own brother and then took off.
So that's Ed's brother getting his ass handed to him in the weeks before David's killed. Then he supposedly steals some tools from his brother and disappears.
That's the guy that got David interested in the business. He ended up screwing us out of about $20,000, screwed my parents out of that. And in fact, David always said that he was going to get him and beat him up real good if he ever, caught him, but he never did.
Now, the greenhouse was supposed to be finished in 4 months. Well, it's still, parts of it's not finished. And then they didn't pay the greenhouse place off in Apopka. They didn't pay the cement. That was about, I think, $12,000 there. They didn't pay that, but they took our money. He took our money, but then he didn't pay no bills.
Next, the investigator asked about one of David's former girlfriends, and her name was Jeanette. She had a son, and she insisted that that son was David's.
It was a long-time girlfriend of his, which over the past 20 years, she'd been with David. She wouldn't let him go. She got married, had a kid, and later she tried to say it was David's, which it isn't. And we've never, recognized her or anything. And she always, any girlfriend he ever got, she broke it up. She's one of these kind that's insanely jealous. But anyway, I do know she couldn't let him go. She wouldn't stay away. But in the last year or so, she's moved back down here.
This is David's mom, and you'll hear witnesses refer to her as Micey.
It was like an obsession. She wouldn't leave David alone. And she called up one day. I didn't hear from her for a long, long time. And she called up one day and she says, "I've got a baby." I said, "You have?" And I said, she says, "It's David's baby." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, you're married." She says, "Oh, no, I didn't live with that man." And so then I didn't see her for a long time, and she brought the kid around. And she kept saying it was David's. Well, some of her girlfriends says, "Well, it's not David's." Says she just wants it to be David. And she's telling this because she'd go to any length to cause trouble, or she wanted him, But from time to time she would write letters and, wanting money and stuff like that. And David would give her money from time to time.
Next, the investigator asked about Craig.
He's a real quiet-mannered boy, real mannered, but then He's always been, he's been a little bit weird ever since school. I remember he used to come out there with Dave and they lift weights together. Got to be, pretty big. He got in the contest and was like Mr. Florida. Well, evidently they've been at a bar and he came out to the property there.
It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they had a really bad fight. I mean, David about killed him. And this went on, the fight lasted for well over an hour. Me and my dad tried to stop it, and we couldn't stop it. He was on his hands and knees, and David was kicking him in the head, and every time he'd kick him, he'd call him a mama's boy. Mama's boy, you're just a mama's boy. I believe that had such a dramatic effect. Been simmering over that all these years, and I honestly believe he's the one that killed my brother.
Broke his jaw. He was bleeding all over, and I spent some time in the hospital, and I had his jaw wired together. And so that, he never forgot that.
Okay, so let's stop for a minute and acknowledge that this fight sounds really bad. I mean, picture a fight that is so bad, two men can't stop it. And it ends with one of them on their hands and knees, getting kicked repeatedly in the head. This fight sounds like someone's villain origin story. And given what we know so far, it very well might have been.
He called me up probably 3 months ago. And he started this stuff. He says, I want to warn you, says, David is being poisoned. He's not going to live much longer. And he was raving, and I had heard him, that he'd been saying about the poison stuff, poisoning me. And says she's poisoning David. And he says, oh, you better listen to me. He says, you're his mother, and you should go out there and warn him. And I said, David, I would escort him to the gate and tell him not to set foot out here again.
David had been telling me this too. Yeah, he's going to get me one day. He's out to get me. Come out there and he'd ramble on about trying to poison him. She was putting poison in his food and all that shit. And David just would kind of laugh at him, because he's kind of nutty. And I told David, I said, I wouldn't let him come out there no more or something. I said, it sounds like for him to say things like that he's the one that deep down inside that's wanting you dead. I says, I wouldn't let him get around my food or nothing. I says, maybe he might try to poison you or something. But David would still let him come out there. He wouldn't listen. He wasn't scared of nobody.
That's his problem. He wasn't afraid of the devil. If the devil jumped up out of the ground, he'd take him on.
I warned David. I says, I wouldn't let him come around me. I says, he's the type that's liable to just go berserk or shoot everybody in the room or something and then shoot his own self. And David wouldn't listen to nobody.
What was your dad like? What do you remember as a 20-year-old about who he was?
He was like a country type, redneck type guy, cowboy boots, 4-wheel drive, pit bulls in the back, beer drinking, like your regular country redneck type guy. My mother was the love of his life.
Yeah.
And, there was other women and stuff, but he always loved my mother. He would even ask about her after she got married.
Yeah.
Like your mom been doing.
Right.
He was funny. And he goes, well, you think she's ready to cheat on her husband yet? And I said, no. And he just laughed,
Well, I heard through the grapevine that I was a suspect. That was, I can't remember if it was before I went on that interview or after. But I had nothing to hide, so I didn't care what they thought,
Did you only do one interview, or did you do more than one?
Just one.
Okay, then I know exactly what interview it was. And they only asked you about your wife at the very end. And you said, I suspected, but I wasn't sure.
What was your relationship with David?
We were partners in the carpet business for about 8 years. And the last year, we dissolved that partnership because he didn't need the money and I did. I've got 5 kids, and he doesn't have nothing but himself, And plus it was getting to be quite a drive for him every day, He wanted to start, he'd get to my house by 9 o'clock, And by the time we pick carpet up and start actually working, it's about 12 o'clock and he wants to go home at 2. He beat the traffic home, That's just the way he was. He needed money, but he didn't care about working for it, which I couldn't do that. I had to just get away from him and get with it,
So say, how long ago was it to dissolve your relationship?
A year
Partnership?
in January.
About a year in January?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was he living out there, his property at that time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How often did you go out to see him? When was the last time you saw him before his death?
Well, the last time I seen him was the last day of hunting season, which would have been January the 22nd. That was the last day of hunting season.
Were you out at his house the day they had the party, the barbecue?
Which one?
Fish fry? Yeah. The one approximately 3 to 4 weeks, I guess, before his death.
Oh yeah, I'm the one that started that.
Okay.
He fished a lot, had a bunch of fish, and I got a bunch of fish and hush puppies and everything. We had a big party. Yeah, I was in there. He had mentioned something about a big deal he was going to get, but he wouldn't tell me nothing about it, which I didn't know. He said, you don't even know the people anyway. And it was like, I just shrugged it off. You know, I always hear somebody going to do this, somebody going to do that. You know, I just shrugged it off. And he said, it was like, I don't know, a few weeks later I seen him again, and I said, well, how about this big deal you got going? He goes, it fell through. And that was the end of that.
On Tuesday night, the 20th, where were you at?
We had a fight. She was going to start to go and play baseball crap, and I just said, I'm going. So I went to this little bar. It's like a private bar, and the guy I seen there, I seen his car was a carpet. He owns a carpet store there, and I just went in there and opened the door. I went to open the door, and it was locked. And then when I knocked on the door, he was there, and then me and him were together drinking in that bar.
Other than what you said about have any other ideas who might have killed him?
I really don't. I can't think of anybody that didn't like him. Everybody that I know just loved David.
Word was around she was having an affair with David, or had one. You know anything about that?
No, I didn't. I suspected it. I mean, I suspected her having an affair, but I didn't know it was with David. Sometimes I used to think that, because the guy had a lot of charisma, you know.
That's what you didn't know anything about.
No.
Okay. You didn't have a grudge against him?
No, I didn't.
Did you kill him?
No, I didn't. I loved him too much.
Okay.
Women loved him. You know, he was a good-looking guy, and women just chased after him.
Maybe once every couple of weeks I'd go out to see him out there. More often we would just meet at a little bar in between for a few drinks. He was at my home on the Tuesday before his death for maybe 3 hours. He was very, very depressed. The last few times that I saw him, he was extremely depressed over the nursery and whatever else, I don't know.
Okay, and he'd been drinking a lot?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he had been drinking a lot. That was our biggest conflict, was his drinking and his drugs. When I first heard about this incident, I was afraid maybe David had done it himself, because he had spoken of suicide to me.
When you saw him on Tuesday before his death, was he drunk?
No, he was not. It was very unusual. He was very, very depressed, though. And basically, he was very, very lonely. He was very lonely. He felt that his friends used him for, while he had money and the toys to play with and the property to hunt on, but when the beer was gone and the money was gone, that they all left him. He spent a lot of time by himself.
Okay, when was the last time you were at the mobile home before his death?
On February 11th. I hadn't seen him since, but I did talk to him last on the telephone Tuesday evening at 6:30 with our last conversation.
How did he sound?
Very tired. Said he'd worked in the greenhouse all day. His daughter had been there helping him. And he seemed very tired, maybe preoccupied. We talked for maybe 20-25 minutes.
Do you know if anybody else was there at the time? Did he mention anything?
Did not mention any names. I didn't hear any voices in the background.
She last spoke with him the night he was killed at about 6:30, and that's about an hour before witnesses will see a light-colored vehicle coming out of David's driveway around 7:30 p.m. 2 males that were headed to a family member's house the night before David was found. This would have been the father and son of one of David's neighbors. In his short handwritten statement, the father said,
I was driving to my son's house with my other son in the truck with me, and we met a vehicle I thought to be a yellow Mercedes or BMW two-door car at approximately 7:30 p.m. on February 20th, 1990. When I turned the corner on the dirt road, I seen the headlights approaching, and my son remarked, You have your high beams on. And I said, Yes, and he does too. I then dimmed my lights and proceeded a little further, and finally he dimmed his. As we passed each other, we were going real slow, both of us. There appeared to be 2 or 3 people in the car. There was an antenna, appeared to be, on the left front of the vehicle.
Now the son said this. Driving west on a clay road toward David's driveway and saw lights coming from down David's driveway. We thought it had its brights on. We both pulled over to get by. It looked like more than one in the car. Car was a small fastback. It looked white, maybe a Toyota Celica. May have been a chrome-looking bumper and chrome luggage rack. Time was about 7:30. The things that I always remember about a case are inevitably the little human things that, if I close my eyes, I can picture them doing. And it's always a very average, unremarkable thing that nobody would think twice about until it's all that you have left to consider when you're trying to figure out who killed them. I mentioned that I reviewed crime scene photos in this case. Well, I have this one picture of David Ricketson's bathroom, and I got that familiar tug at my roots when I saw the dental pick and electric toothbrush. I guess the juxtaposition of big old redneck and impeccable oral hygiene never really occurred to me. The man with the mustache and the suit, wearing a hat and monocle, who's staring intently from the bottle of Panama Jack lotion, instantly evoked a smell from my childhood. But the Florida lottery tickets, the ballpoint pen, the pair of readers, all next to a roll of toilet paper on the bathroom sink just beside the toilet, spoke to me a little louder about where David Ricketson was at the time that he was killed. I wonder if anyone ever checked the numbers on those lotto tickets. I thought about what David was thinking when he bought them, fresh from being screwed out of a bunch of money that he had hoped to parlay into a big, life-altering windfall.
4 months ago, David wanted me to take a $2,000 loan out because said he wanted to pay his debts back. A couple others that he had borrowed money from to get him by until the nursery started profiting. Well, I could not take a loan out. I didn't have enough equity in my house. David was very, very upset about it. Just a week after Christmas, I had gone up there, and I saw the check stub for, I think it was $1,100 on his dashboard. And I said to David, I said, where's all the money? I said, what'd you do with your money? He says, I had to pay this one and pay that one and this and Christmas gifts. And, well, come to find out, he did none of that. He blew all of that money, except for the money to turn his phone on.
He was a good cook, and she took real good care of him when she was there. And on the weekends, he didn't have to do a thing. But that he couldn't take her kids, and that he was worried about her husband. Said that her husband had threatened to kill himself or kill David if she didn't stop seeing him. So with all the problems that were happening, I was surprised that he was still seeing her, but I think it was pretty convenient. She just hop on the bus, come up, spend the weekend with him, and then he could just send her back. He wouldn't have to be bothered with her again for another couple of weeks. I'm tired of her kids. I'm tired of her being here every weekend. Plus, her husband is a nut. He's threatened to kill himself or kill me.
He never mentioned anything in regards to drugs to me. Not selling it or using it.
Did he ever send anybody that you know of?
Well, it could have been the night, the day that David asked to borrow $50 from me. I learned this after the fact that I had loaned David $50 for a barbecue grill. I took my $50 early afternoon, didn't come back until 7:38 at night, and I was concerned. I said to David, I said, where's the barbecue grill? Where's the money? Well, David said, oh, he couldn't get it. Well, at that time I went up to the trailer. It was about 8 o'clock at night. They were leaving it to go to check something about the barbecue grill. David had a small handgun in his hand. And we argued about it. I said, you're not leaving with no gun, and if you're going, I'm going. And he says, you're not going where there's low life. Of course, I didn't think anything about there could possibly be drug dealing. And David did give me his handgun, and I put it under the front seat of my truck. And he told me that to go back to the fire where everybody was, and came back maybe an hour later. And of course, I've learned that after the fact that they did do crack that night. But never did I see anything going on.
And now he's asking her about Jeanette.
I think she may have supplied David with cocaine, because David did tell me that she dealt in selling cocaine and did do it. She seemed to know maybe something about, I'm not saying maybe she knew what happened to David or who did it, but maybe she knew of some circumstances that could maybe put, a light.
Did she express that to you when she called you? What,
Yes, she did.
After,
yes, she did.
Did she call you?
She called me. She kind of made me feel like she knew something.
Police interviewed Jeanette, the woman who alleged that she had a son that was David's. Lake County Sheriff's Office did not provide me with the audio of that interview, but they did send me the transcript. I was living with at that point, my ex-sister-in-law. And we got in touch, David got in touch with us through a mutual friend of mine. And we started a relationship, and our contact back at that time. David was coming over he was coming over a lot, and my sister-in-law met somebody, and she was going to be moving in with him. So I couldn't afford the apartment by myself. So David had asked me to come out there and stay with him. So I was going to do that. And then he said that he talked to his mom, and his mom said that I couldn't come out there. So then he says that Craig is looking for a roommate. So Craig started calling me up and asking me to come and look at the place where he was living, and David had asked me to go stay there. He'd been seeing Craig occasionally, and they had talked, but at that point, Craig had not come out to David's house. We had called David, and I said, "Are you sure you want me to bring Craig?" And he goes, "Yeah." He says, "Craig's been bugging me to come out." And he says, "Just bring him out here." That was the only time that I took Craig out there.
And when was that again?
That was in April of '89. And then Craig and I got in an argument. I moved out in May, and I got my own place then. At that point, David was still coming over, and he had said, him and Craig were still talking. Said he'd come out a couple times. Sometimes he'd come out with somebody, and sometimes Craig had come by himself.
Did David ever say who brought Craig out when he came?
Yeah, his girlfriend. She was a real skinny black girl. One particular time, David called up and asked if they could come to my house. And they were working on some kind of a deal and wanted to meet at my place. And, at that point, my son was living with me, and I felt very uncomfortable, and I just asked David if he really trusts Craig, and he goes, "Oh, yeah." He said, we ironed out our differences. We're working on a deal. But I don't know if anything ever came out of that or not. Then after that, February 14th was the last time I saw David. I do know that Craig was dealing a lot, strictly because I was there, and that's why he threatened me. He thought that I knew, but I really didn't until he more or less confessed.
Did you know of any deals that David set up with Ed, or?
I have no idea what he's talking about. I knew he was doing the lettuce.
The greenhouse, doing that?
Yeah.
And did you ever hear of a deal that David was trying to get Ed to go in with him?
No, I didn't. That surprised me. The only deal that I know that they were working on was some kind of business that they were, because Ed was trying to get David and his dad to invest in his stuff. But David didn't tell me what. I just assumed because we went out there to his farm that that's what it was, the hydroponic stuff. We had gone over there a couple times and everything, but I didn't, I just thought that was strictly a business deal.
Okay, do you know of any relationship he had with,
That name sounds familiar. What does he do?
They were in the carpet business.
Oh, okay.
Did they get along well?
They did for a while, until David started messing around with his wife. He came out there, and he and David had been friends for years. He came up there, and David told me, he said, "I think he's mad at me." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I told him somebody was messing around with his wife. And I went, why would you tell him that? And he said, well, because it was me. And I'm going, why did you tell him? And he said, well, if you can believe it or not, he was saying what a perfect wife he had, and she would never run around on him.
Did David ever say that he'd come out there and threaten him or anything like that?
Well, yeah, but I think that, he did. He told him to leave his wife alone or something, but he was afraid of David. Most people were.
Was Craig afraid of him?
Was Craig afraid of David? Oh, yes, Craig was afraid of David. That beating, he beat him up once. He was afraid that he would beat him up again.
You called David that night, the 20th? About what time was that?
6:15, something like that.
Okay, did you leave a message?
Yes, I did. I told him that it was raining and that we were not gonna, my son and I were going to be coming up there to spend the night, and I told him we weren't going to be coming. We were going to go out to the movie.
Okay, did he answer the phone or did?
No, he did not.
Did he pick up the line or you just left a message on?
I left a message.
Did he call you back that evening?
No, when I come in that night, we got in about 10, and of course there was only one message on the recorder. So I played it back and it wasn't him, and I thought, well, that's strange. And then the next day, I guess 10 or 11 o'clock, I got a call and they asked if I'd heard what happened, and then he told me, and I lost it. I was yelling, and he goes, then you hadn't heard? And I go, you're kidding, right?
Okay, did you ever warn David about?
Yeah, many, many times. And he goes, he said, I'm not worried about Craig. He'd say, I got these dogs. I can see who's coming. I'm not worried. Blah, 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 And I told him, David, I wouldn't trust Craig. Can't trust him. And he'd telling me, you're just being, but Craig was just, I never liked Craig. Anyway, just the facts of what he did to me, what I knew, and he accused me. And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, tell me a little bit about that then. You said he had gotten violent with you.
Yeah, well, I'd come in and...
And this is in the apartment when you were staying with him?
Yeah. I come into the apartment from work, and the next thing I know, he's got me by my throat up against a wall. And I mean up off the ground. Not just slung back on the wall. He had me up off the floor and with my neck. And I'm going, what do you think you're doing? Because I was petrified. I didn't let him know I was. I go, what do you think you're doing? And he goes, I know you called the cops on me. And I went, for what? I said, what are you talking about? Oh, the cops were here today. And I said, well, why? What? And he said, I'm dealing drugs. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, Craig. And I said, if you don't put me down, I'm going to kill you. And, of course, he put me down. And he goes, well, there were some cops here today, and I thought you told him. And I went, Craig, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about what you're doing. And I said, and I really don't want to know, but you need to stop if you're paranoid of it. I need to be leaving. If you think that I'm going to be, that you're threatening me, I need to be leaving, because I'm going to be doing something to you. You don't need me here. And of course I was petrified. I called up my sister-in-law and I said, look, this guy's nuts. I'm moving. I got to get out of here. And I called up David too. And David, I told him what Craig had done. Now, whether or not David did anything to Craig after that, I don't know. But, I just wanted him to know that, This guy's nuts, and I'm not staying out there for you or anybody else. I'm out of here. Everybody was out to get Craig. Everybody. I do know that he was selling steroids. And I do know that because he went over to a couple people's houses that he had. I do know that he had sold those to.
Okay, do you know if David was buying any from him?
No, I don't. If he may have been, but
Was he buying coke from Craig, do you know?
Maybe. David didn't tell me he did.
Did Craig ever go into any detail about any deals with David?
No, Craig never told me anything.
Did David ever get into any of the details?
Just there was one deal that he told me about that he was, and it was going to be a big deal. It was going to be a big deal, and they wanted to use my apartment. And that was because he said he didn't want Craig coming out there with these people. And I go, well, I don't want Craig coming to my place. And he goes, well, you don't have to be there. And he said, we won't even tell Craig it's your place. And I'm going, okay. And I was in agreement as long as I didn't have to be there, but it never happened. But it was going to be something that it was going to bring a lot of money, and then he was going to give me some of it. So that's all I know. But he didn't, it never happened.
Had you ever seen Craig with his girlfriend's car?
Yeah, that's why it would just amaze me that he would want me to take him places because he would use her car a lot of times.
Okay, he would drive her white car by himself?
By himself, that's what I'm saying, yeah. And that's why it would, I was always amazed when he would want me or somebody else, not just me to take him somewhere. He would always get upset if he'd ask somebody to take him somewhere and then they would say they couldn't do it or something, come up and it was like, I'd go, well, Craig, you can drive. And he said, well, I have sometimes, but I'd rather somebody else drove.
Okay, so it wasn't unusual for him to drive her car.
That's what I'm saying. It would just amaze me that he would have me drive him somewhere because, he could drive his car. He could drive her car. She would drive him, but most of the times, whenever they went out, though, she would drive.
I still can't believe it's taken all this time. Gosh, you'd have thought the way that happened, something would have popped up.
Nothing firm as yet. How did you first learn about his death?
His ex-girlfriend called me up the morning it happened, the one that had lived with him, that I talked to you about yesterday on the phone. She called me up, it must have been 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was out there at 11:30 or 12 because I waited around for an hour or two with Clyde and that guy that's working out there. I can't remember his name.
Okay. Did she tell you how she found out about it?
No, she didn't. I didn't ask her. I don't like a woman to start with. Never have. And I wondered why she's calling me.
Okay.
And I hadn't even talked to her in a year. The last time I saw him, I told you, was about 4 weeks before he died. I went out in this trailer and talked with him 2 or 3 hours.
What did you all talk about that day?
He was real despondent. And that day he was almost in tears over arguing with Clyde and Massey. Massey had wrote him about a 4 or 5 page letter. I didn't see it and I didn't read it or nothing. But he told me that she had written him a letter and it had been about a month, 5 to 6 weeks maybe, that she had not come out there, had not called him, and would not speak to him. And she had wrote him this big long letter and told him how sorry he was. And anyway, he was real despondent over that, and him and Clyde were constantly bickering over money. Clyde would give David $200 a week and expect him to work 60 hours a week out there on that damn machine. And then he wouldn't give him operating capital. He did at one time, but I already told you about that. That capital ended up missing. He called me up on the phone one day. This was 7 or 8 months way back. It was one of the times that I saw him during the year. And I had met this guy. It was a guy that he was in business with in the greenhouse, that set him up in the greenhouse business. He called me up one day and he told me, he said, this guy that I'm in business with can get some cocaine. I done forgot the price, but he was talking about lots of it, a few pounds at a just ridiculously low price. He said, do you know how we can sell it or we can move it? I said, not me, motherfucker. I've got me a good business going, a job I'm not getting involved in. But he said, well, this guy knows some people in Miami, and all he's got to do is go meet. And I remember him telling me this. He says he meets the truck at a truck stop out on I-95 and goes out there and picks it up. David told me, he says, well, I'm thinking about doing a deal with this guy and making some money real quick because I need me a new truck. I don't want to ask Clyde for one. And I told him, I says, you're going to end up in jail fucking with that shit. But he told me, he says, yeah, that guy's got connections all over the place. He can do this and he can do that. And, we were just talking on the phone, and he says, hey, this sumbitch out here I'm in business with is told me he can get some cocaine for next to nothing. And that he says, we can get it for about $300 an ounce. He said, and get rich quick. He said, we can do us one load and make a bunch of money. He says, you want to get in on it? And I said, hell no. I either saw him or talked to him on the phone another time after that. And I asked him, I said, well, did your deal go down and everything? And he said, no, it never happened. And he just shut it off. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. And then I come and find out later, after he's dead, that him and that guy wasn't in business no more. And I come and find out that David had lost a bunch of money through a checking account or something. And the same time that that money ended up missing, so did this guy, you know, that was in the business with him. He was supposed to have gone on a business trip, and then he just left town and never came back. And you know, I don't know it for a damn fact, for an absolute fact, but one that told me that David told her that that son of a bitch took that money and split with it.
In your conversation back in there, did David ever approach you to distribute it for him?
Oh yeah, he asked me if I could help him sell it. So you know, I know that he wasn't shitting me about this deal. I'm not just sitting here blowing smoke up you, bud. It was something that he in his mind absolutely thought was gonna go down.
The investigator asks him directly about Ed and David's relationship.
Well, when David first met the guy had greenhouses over there, and he was trying to get David interested in setting up a hydroponic business like his, but he was growing some pot out there too. Now, I mean, I don't know it because I didn't see it. I didn't go out there and see it. But David come up with a pound of some of the prettiest homegrown pot I ever seen in my life one time. He says, look at this shit. He said, this guy lives out here next to me. He's got these greenhouses, grows it. You know, and then they got to talking about that hydroponic business. But see, I've always thought from the beginning here that it either had something to do. Now, I don't know. I would bet everything that I own. I'd bet my new truck, unless you know something I don't know. You know, if that son of a bitch has got a ironclad alibi and somebody knows exactly where he was and seen him and will tell me that, I'll sleep a lot better.
This guy firmly believes Craig was the person responsible for David's death. So the investigator asks him why he thinks that.
'Cause he's hated him for 20 years. I've always gotten along with him good. I've always felt like he was one of the few friends David's got any damn brains. He was a couple of years younger or something like that, and they lifted weights together and all this good kind of stuff. And taking that Dianabol, them steroids, I mean, way back before people ever even knew about him. You know, he was a Mr. Florida at one time. And, you know, David was his idol, and he grew up and got big, and one day they got in an argument, and he jumped on old David, because he figured he could whip him. Well, David put him in the hospital 3 days, you know, and while he was in the hospital, I wasn't there, but there was like a party with a lot of the girls, and everybody was around, you know, sitting around drinking or whatever. And David called him a queer, but he didn't call him a queer to call him a queer. He said it like, all that big goof looks like a queer with all them muscles. Wanted to kill him ever since then, because he's been obsessed with the fact that everybody in town thinks he's a queer because David told him that. He's been mad at him all these years. I feel sorry for him if he didn't do it. You know, but unless y'all find out who did, everybody that knows him's gonna think he did it. I feel real guilty about this thing because the way them two got back together and got to talking and being friends was because David was sitting at my house one day, sitting in my gold chair, and I got the telephone right there beside it, and I got my little black book.
So, there's David thumbing through this guy's address book and comes across Craig's name and number. Now remember, they had been estranged around this time. For years. They hadn't spoken or seen each other, so he sees Craig's name in the address book, and he ends up calling him right there.
Yeah, and he called him up. I like the shit, because they hadn't spoken in 20 years. And David called him up on the phone. He said, hey, big boy, you still pissed at me? And he made friends with him, so he started coming back around. But the last time that I talked with him, you know, he would tell me, yeah, I went out to see Ricketson. We went shooting guns and everything. He says, but you know what? I still ain't forgot that motherfucker called me a queer. That's just how he'd say it. He'd say, I still ain't forgot it. He says he thinks I've done wrote that off, but I hadn't. And the last time I talked with him, he looked me dead straight. Now, I come in his apartment, and there was 2 black guys sitting on the couch. And when I came in to see him, I was kind of looked around. I was leery, and they got up and they left. He said, them 2 guys there, he said, you know what, they'd kill somebody for $100. That's just what he told me. He said they would kill somebody for $100. He said the only problem with that is sooner or later down the road they'd get caught. He said, you know, if you ever want to kill somebody, you got to do that your damn self, because that way there ain't no witnesses.
There was an initial interview with Craig right after David was discovered dead, which took place 6 days after the homicide. Craig said that about 7 or 8 months before his death, David had approached him about getting into a drug deal with him, something that involved him and Ed, and they wanted him to either help with backing or distribution, but he refused to become involved with the deal. He said that he was told sometime just before Christmas that the deal fell through. Craig also said that David lost a lot of money to Ed in the deal and about a kilo of cocaine, and that this money had been taken from an account set up by his father Clyde to pay for the building of the greenhouse. David told him it was between $20,000 and $30,000, and that Clyde was under the impression that Ed had just stolen the money from the account, but the truth was that Ed had beaten David out of the money in the deal. They asked him if he was aware of any special type of bullet that fragmented, and Craig said he did know about them, and that David had, in fact, introduced him to those type of rounds, which he described as having a little plastic ball that explodes with tiny metal fragments. Craig said that David had borrowed $200 about 4 or 5 weeks before his death, and David had given him his .38 as collateral, but that David paid him the money back, and Craig returned his .38 to David. When they asked Craig where he was on February 20th, he said he was at home earlier in the evening, and then he went to several bars in the Orlando area. So the interview that you're about to hear with Craig takes place on July 5th, 1990, about 5 months after David Ricketson's murder. But right out of the gate, all Craig really wants to talk about is one specific incident, for the most part.
I had my car stole. This was the 10th month of '89. And anyway, they stole my car. And when I got my car back, all that was missing out of my car was all the stuff I had to get.
Craig has a list, and first on that list is his story that his car was stolen by 2 individuals who asked for a ride home from a bar one night. Now here's the kicker. He says the only thing stolen from his car was all of the documentation or proof related to the woman who he was accusing of poisoning him by putting something in his baby oil. And of course, the other thing that was stolen was a package of the special bullets that cops have been asking everyone about.
What you can put in my baby oil to poison it. Although nobody believes I'm being poisoned, but I had it. All the information I had on my ex-wife. Okay. Because she had been drugging me for 10 years. I found out I was being drugged, so I was poisoned as well. And I had 10 bullets, glacier bullets, stolen from me.
10 glacier bullets, special bullets, the kind of bullets that police seem to believe killed David Ricketson, based on evidence found at the scene.
Anyway, I got my car back a couple days later, and the only thing that was taken out of my car was 10 glaciers. None of my guns were taken.
What kind of guns did you have in the car?
I had 2 .38s, a 357, a 25. I was moving that thing. Okay, I was planning on going up to Georgia because everybody that I've been drugged for years, and I started being poisoned. I went to the police, and they. So my attorney, who's been a good friend since the 4th grade, so I leave town, change your name, and start over. So I was going to go up to Georgia and find a place. I got my car stolen, so I just, so I just put what I had, my clothes I had, and I went on a bus. I went up to a friend of mine in North Florida, and that was it. Trying to get away. So.
The guns that were in the car, real quick. Yeah. You remember the models of them?
No. But the guns were not stolen.
Okay.
The guns were. I got all my guns back.
Okay, they weren't
just the bullets.
Okay,
right.
One of the guns that was in the car at the time, the .38, you think was David's?
Yeah.
The Rossi. You said before you thought David's gun was a Rossi.
Yeah, or Taurus.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think it
Yeah.
was in the car?
Yeah. Oh, one other thing, and I told your captain, because he's going to do the polygraph, I told him, this would be the last time I'm out. And if you want me again, you have to get a subpoena or something. I got to get on with my own.
In case you didn't hear that last bit, he said, one other thing that I told your captain, because he was doing the polygraph, I think, this will be the last time I'm up. And if you want me again, you'll have to get a subpoena or something, because I got to get on with my life.
Do you think it was somebody that he knew?
Yeah. It was somebody he knew. It was more and more.
This is Colin Banks, another man who was in his 60s at the time, who was into hydroponic farming and was there to witness the nursery build at the Ricketson property. David was using his patented technology in his greenhouse.
And I ended up virtually living with David for months and months at a time.
How many months were you there?
I would say I was there about 7 months on and off, and the last time I lived there, I think, if one uses that expression, was about 6 or 7 weeks before he was killed, and the last time I saw him was about 3 weeks before he was killed. I visited the farm with some people who were interested in buying a greenhouse.
Okay, buying his greenhouse?
No, buying a similar. I had an arrangement whereby I could show the greenhouse to anybody that was interested, as long as I didn't think it would conflict with them selling their lettuce. So, I mean, they didn't want someone building next door and growing lettuce, but basically, in that instance, it was someone who was interested in building in Puerto Rico.
Now the investigator asks Colin about Ed and the financial situation with the missing money.
And David were making fast with the money that was supposed to have been spent on the greenhouse. I mean, they were drawing money like it went out of fashion, and I had no idea what they did with it. They weren't doing much work. First of all, no one believed me that the money had been taken out of the corporation, not David, not the old man or anyone else. And eventually I was able to show them what had happened. And David eventually fell out with, I realized the truth of what I told him, and he fell out with Ed.
This is Ed Bloom. He was hired to build the nursery that David Ricketson planned to grow his hydroponic lettuce in.
I met him last year, just about this time. Matter of fact, it might have been about a year ago today, at JJ's bar in Sorrento.
Okay.
You want to know the circumstances of that meeting? Or he overheard me talking to my brother about hydroponics. He approached me and said he'd always been interested in hydroponics. We started talking and developed a friendship.
So you developed a friendship. Were you instrumental in setting up their hydroponic plan?
Yes, I certainly was. I was the one that conceived the idea, designed it, and sold. And Dave and I together brought it to his father, Clyde, and sold him the idea.
Okay. What was the amount of that contract?
The total amount of the contract, as I recall, was either $169,000 or $179,000. I'm not sure. I'd have to look.
Okay.
I forget.
This relationship that you developed, how close were you?
We were actually very, very close. I would say between about April last year and I guess about July, the end of July, maybe the beginning of August, except for a period when I was gone about 3 to 4 weeks. I probably hung out with David just about every day.
June and July, building materials were delivered by CBS Industries, a company that Ed had hired in the course of his job as building contractor. So they're delivered, and not long after, Ed disappears for 3 or 4 weeks. He was actively avoiding a warrant out of Pinellas County at this exact time. He didn't show up for court on one of those dates, and there was a warrant put out for his arrest, and bond was set at $50,000.
What about David's involvement in drug use or coke use?
Okay, as I've said to you before, as David and I were developing this friendship, and naturally you get to talking about your past. Well, we both started talking about our past, and both had learned that we had both done cocaine, in the past. David had informed me that that he knew all kinds of connections, and of course I would brag to him and say that I knew all kinds of connections up north, and all that. But I also had stated to him many times that I hadn't done it or gone anywhere near it in 5 years, and that I wasn't about to ever do it again. David, as far as I know, well, as I do know for a fact that David was, and I still don't know his last name, buying and using cocaine, on a regular basis. I wouldn't say, on an addiction style basis, quote quote, but on a regular basis, once or twice a week.
Is that what David told you?
I had witnessed at least twice, I can say safely, the transactions.
How much did he buy?
Oh, usually an eighth of an ounce. David would always, when we were finished work at the end of the day and he was bored and he had a couple of beers in him, he'd say, let's go downtown. And I just, I only ended up going with him twice, but I know that he went more often than that.
Then he asks Ed if he'd ever seen Craig out at David's property. He said only once, and it was in mid-June, right around his birthday, and he remembers that because his brother, Ed's brother, was down visiting him at the time, and both he and his brother were out at David's property that day. And David had said to him many times that he didn't want Craig to know where he lived because he thought he was crazy enough to do something to him, based on a previous grudge.
What was he driving?
He was with, as I said before, this little black woman in a yellow convertible, as far as I know.
Okay. You don't know what kind of car it was?
No, I didn't pay attention. If I was pressed to say what kind it was, I'd say it was a Dodge convertible, but I'm not sure.
Did you know who this black girl was?
No, I had no idea. I understood through David, that she was his girlfriend.
Next, he asks, did David ever take you to Craig's apartment and approach you about setting up a deal?
Setting up a deal?
Yes, they did. Yes, they said as a matter of fact, both times I was there, and a lot David used to pressure me to try and set up a coke deal with him with these what are they? Dominican people that I know, are coke dealers up in the New York area.
Okay. So it would have been from New York?
Yes, it would have been from New York.
Did you ever approach them?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, every time they suggested it, in all honesty, one time I said, I was drunk and I said, sure, yeah, I can do it. But when it came right down to the wire, as I say, I hadn't touched it or done anything with it in 5 years, and I just, I wouldn't even know how to begin to do it, and I wouldn't do it because I have a good, legitimate business going right now. So I really flatly refused them every time the subject came up.
Okay, but you never told them that you could bring in get a shipment of coke in for them?
Well, yeah, I said that one time I did. I said, I was bragging. I said, sure, I can get all you want in this, just. I was drunk, and
when was that?
Probably around the same time, around mid-June.
Did you ever discuss money with them, about how much money it would take?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I told him it would probably cost $20,000 to get a pound of cocaine down here.
That is, interestingly, the amount of money that appeared to be missing from the business account that Clyde alleges went into Ed's personal checking account.
Okay. Did they ever come up with the money? Did they tell you they could
No.
get it?
No, well, yeah. Back around, he always had at least the 2 times that I saw him empty it, there were $30,000 in cash in that bag.
Did he tell you it was 30,000 or did he count it?
Well, I mean, I could see what it was. It was stacks of hundreds, and each stack of 100, I guess, was $10,000, and he had 3 of them. So.
Okay, do you have anything else in the bag with him?
Yes, there was always a gun, and there was always cocaine. The gun, by the way, I remembered something else about it. It had a filed off, thumb, whatever the trigger thing, thumb thing, hammer.
Filed, right?
Well, it was cut off. It wasn't there. It looked like it had been filed smooth.
Okay. Did it look like a semi-automatic or a...
It was, a revolving kind of...
Okay, had a cylinder.
Yeah.
Okay.
I honestly, one thing that's funny, I never shot a gun in my whole life before I met David. So that's
Okay.
David's problem always was that he needed to get the cocaine fronted to him because, of course, he never had any money. He was always flat. Too paranoid to ever give anybody any money, so David would have had to. And that's my greatest speculation in David's murder is that somehow somebody fronted him some cocaine, and he had the cocaine there, and somebody came that was going to buy it and just didn't pay him for it. That's, or else he got it and used it, gave it away, and didn't pay for it, and whoever he got it from.
Okay, this discrepancy in the, as you're well aware, Clyde feels that you took him for $25,000, something in the greenhouse.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What did you do with that money?
Clyde is absolutely wrong about that. There's not 1 cent of money missing. We just merely underbid the job. Clyde is talking to his hat, and many times I've tried to confront Clyde about that. We just simply underbid the job. That was the only problem with it. There was no missing money. I didn't steal any money. I didn't take any money. I don't drive a new car. I don't go on fancy trips. I don't have anything. We just underbid the job. There was no money.
Okay, they didn't give you an extra. You didn't go to them and ask for an extra $25,000 or $20,000.
No, never.
Okay, so the total. What was the total amount you got, Clyde?
Well, now see, here's the thing. Okay, let's start here. When I left to go up north in June, I had this vacation planned for a year. It was right in the middle of the job. Well, I left. I was gone for 3 weeks. When I came back, my ex-partner had withdrawn all of the money from our bank account. He wrote himself a check for $40,000. I've got the canceled check. He wrote himself that check. He bought himself all new tools in his shop. He refurnished his whole shop. He did all. Now I don't anymore. We reconciled, but I'm just telling you the facts. I didn't have one single thing to do. As a matter of fact, I didn't even have the checkbook after June, whenever I left, June 26th, 27th. Whenever I left, I never saw the checkbook from that. Handled all the finances and did everything. And I have every receipt for everything that I paid up to then, and it comes out to the penny.
First, I want to clarify that Ed is accusing Colin, the British fellow, of stealing the money. But you'll recall that Colin said that Ed paid all of the bills.
So there is no missing money. Clyde is absolutely wrong about that.
Okay, you didn't go to David or go to Clyde and tell him that you needed $25,000.
I didn't have anything to do with them after that. And honestly, Mr. Adams, the only reason that I didn't go back to that job was because I discussed it with my wife. I told her about David's cocaine use. She knew how bad I used to be, and I just said, there's no way I can go back. I approached David and I told him this. I said, David, unless all this bullshit stops, I said, I can't come back there to work. It's too dangerous for me. I'm going to lose my wife. I'll lose my kid. I'll lose everything. I can't do it. And besides, I'm drinking too much with you already. And I was. I mean, we were drinking a case of beer every other day or something, and it was just, it was getting ruthless. I let my own farm go to hell. It was a whole bad time. So I told David, unless everything to turn around and everything stopped, that I wasn't going to come back. And I also told him that I was going to tell him why I wasn't going back, because of his cocaine use. David told me if I ever told him that, he said he'd kill me. He wouldn't. He'd beat me up. He said he'd beat the piss out of me. So I just said, I'm not going back there. And I said, and that was why the only reason that Clyde bought that job was because of me. And I'm an honest guy, I mean, I didn't sell him a bill of goods. He got exactly what he was supposed to get out there for a much cheaper price. I mean, I'm bidding the same houses now at $250,000. That's what they cost. We just bid that price so that we'd get the job so we could build one. And that was that. And I told David at the time, I don't have any ill feelings toward him. I don't want any hassle with him. I must confess, I was very scared because he was getting a little crazy, and I thought that he was going to come over and kill me, or do something to me, or wreck my greenhouse or something. So I was a little bit scared.
Now the investigator is asking about Ed's brother.
He had a few problems with David.
Yes, David beat him up. We called the cops that day. They came and looked, and that was it. We never heard anything more about it. Shortly after that, I had problems with it. I'm sure you must have seen in a police report around here somewhere. I broke into my office and wrecked my computer and stole a bunch of my stuff and pawned it. And so he left to go up north then, and he hasn't been back since.
Okay, when did he leave and go back up north?
4 or 5 months ago. You can find out because it actually the day of the police report, when I filed my police report and had the investigator come out, that was he left the day before, and he hasn't been back there since.
When he was asked, just like everyone else, who they thought did it, Ed fingered Craig.
As I told you, I heard Craig, several times say that there was a list of people that he was going to get even with in his life, and that David was on it. I mean, I'd actually heard him say that. He was saying he had a list of people who had either done things to him in the past or who were trying to poison him. Everyone was trying to poison him. I mean, I think that maybe he wasn't really serious, but I think in a crazy moment he could get serious about it. Or if he's having a bad day, a real bad paranoid day. I really truly feel that he's a little dangerous man. I do.
Now, as I listened to Ed Bloom's interview, with the benefit of having done a great deal of research on the man, I knew that he had a very strong propensity to lie. He boldly lied. To police, to investors in his company, to everyone. He was doing so back then, and he continues to this day.
A man from the Catskills has been arrested after police say he charged a local business thousands of dollars to build a barn, but never did the job. According to the Chemung County Sheriff's Office, a local greenhouse in Southport, Chamberlain Acres, paid 72-year-old Edward Bloom to build a pole barn at the business. According to the Sheriff's Office, the business owners made a partial payment to Bloom for materials, but after a year, those materials were never delivered and nothing had been built. Bloom was arrested and later released after paying $30,000 back to the owners. In a statement, co-owner Charlie Todd told AT News, quote, "Bloom used our delay to his advantage while we made payments." The Chemung County Sheriff's Department and the DA's office were monumental in saving our small business during these difficult business climate times we are in.
On January 24th, 1990, a month before David was killed, CBS Industries filed a civil complaint in court against Ed Bloom and his company Future Farms, Inc. But the same day that David Ricketson was killed, the judge had entered a summary judgment against Ed Bloom, which made him responsible for that bill. Just a month after David's death, Ed Bloom showed up in a splashy newspaper article that I told you about earlier in the Orlando Sentinel. And there was a picture of him standing in his home greenhouse, surrounded by rows and rows of hydroponically grown lettuce. In the article, titled "Hydroponics Turns Water into Veggies," reporter Kevin Spear wrote this.
Ed Bloom bobs and weaves around his lettuce farm, grinning. Now and then he snips off a leaf, dips it in a bowl of dressing and eats it.
And that sentence alone gave me a pretty good read on Ed Bloom's personality. He's showy. He's animated, invested in creating a narrative around his hydroponic lettuce. You don't just casually have a bowl of salad dressing sitting in your nursery, do you? Bloom told the reporter,
"This is where I went to school. I've always wanted a garden."
Bloom told the reporter that he was a home builder and a biologist by training. Here's what he told the reporter about himself, his life CV, if you will. And I think the reporter caught on to it too, because here's how he worded it.
Bloom's background is all over the map, both occupationally and geographically.
Ed Bloom told the reporter that he grew up in Connecticut in a family of 14 children. He said he worked for his father's construction company and earned a degree in biology. Later, he said, he moved to Sweden and played in a rock band. When he returned to the States, he said he started his own construction company and built homes for about 8 years. He said he and his wife Nancy moved to Florida in 1987, in part because he was tired of building homes in freezing weather. He told the reporter that while he was interviewing workers to start another construction company, he learned about hydroponics. Ed Bloom, I would learn, is a con man, and that's exactly the impression I got when I read this very first article.
I never grew anything in my life. Now all the lettuce I grow is perfect.
I did note that he never once in this article mentioned the greenhouse he had already built in the area for David Ricketson. I also noted that he is saying this is a new venture for him, something he only decided to dip his toe into when he moved to Florida. He went to school, as he said, right there in his tiny home greenhouse. That would turn out to be a tell, because it appears that he lied about his schooling as well. I found a few advertisements in the Orlando Sentinel, ads placed by Bloom. In the summer of 1990, he put out an ad with an Altamont Springs address and a 1-800 number. What he was hawking at that point was, grow your own hydroponic system. Fresh vegetables on your patio or in your apartment! Exclamation point. A 48-inch by 20.5-inch tray that came with a motor, seeds, nutrients, oasis cubes, and instructions, all for the low, low price of $249, plus shipping and handling, of course. And the ad screamed, in big bold letters, patented. Spoiler alert, it was not patented. By 1992, 2 years after David Ricketson's death, what he was selling via newspaper ad was listed as a complete mini hydroponic farm in your own backyard, so you too can grow delicious, pesticide-free, high-nutrient veggies year-round in your own 8-foot by 12-foot aluminum greenhouse, all for the low, low price of $3,295. Greenhouse erected in 1 day, complete with plumbing. I mean, come on. Ed Bloom was a good talker, and his timeline over the next few years is a veritable breadcrumb trail around Florida of unpaid bills and people who lost money investing in him and in his dreams. The court documents related to his Pinellas County felony arrest that I mentioned earlier indicated that he committed that fraud, which was skipping out on paying for a vehicle that he had put about $860 down on with a check that bounced. He did that in 1988, and that followed him around for the next 4 years, which included the entire time that he was involved with David Ricketson. But what he didn't do was show up for an appearance related to his Pinellas County felony, and so there was a warrant put out for his arrest. The judge upped his bond to $50,000, and he had to come up with $5,000, and I'll give you 2 guesses where he probably got that money, given he paid it on June 17th, 1989 in Clearwater, right around the time he had that checkbook for the Ricketson nursery. And that date falls right in line with the time frame where that company was not paid for their building materials that they delivered to David Ricketson's nursery. Talk about bobbing and weaving. Stealing thousands of dollars from the building fund of a guy you worked for most certainly would not have been looked at by that judge as complying with his order. Ed Bloom knew this, and it certainly wouldn't have benefited him to get popped for stealing someone else's money. When things started to fall apart in the Central Florida area, Bloom skipped out on thousands of dollars of debt that he had racked up at the expense of other business owners in the area, and he headed to Florida's Treasure Coast, to the Stewart area, where he then spent the better part of the 90s schmoozing local businessmen and getting his ideas spotlighted in newspaper articles, just like he had done in Orlando. Then he turned these newly made contacts into investors, and by 1995 his company allegedly had 3 greenhouses with a staff of 12 supplying veggies to local supermarkets. At least that's what he said. That year was when he ran into trouble with state regulators. He had sent a letter to his shareholders lying to them about a signed agreement with a New York investment bank to make future farms a public offering. That would never happen, and that agreement did not exist. When he was questioned about it, he told a reporter that it was a mistake that he lied about it, because he was really negotiating behind the scenes with a Las Vegas-based engineering design company. But when the journalist called to verify that, they were told by the company that they had only had discussions about opening up a hydroponics farm with Ed Bloom. Nothing had been discussed about plans for them to buy the company and go public. More bobbing and weaving. After that fiasco, Bloom stepped down as president, publicly saying that he was going to focus on research and development. He continued to tell shareholders the company was close to going public.
We feel we've positioned ourselves very well to be the biggest and best in the industry.
Ed Bloom had the gumption to tell reporters.
5 years from now, when you think of hydroponics, our name should be the only one that comes up.
And that just smacks of grandiosity, particularly when you know the outcome. In a March 9, 1997 Palm Beach Post article by Sally Swartz, Future Farm USA was described as the parent company at the time, and Bloom said that they not only sold what they were calling their growing system, but also they were 1/3 investor in each location, providing help in growing produce and marketing it. The article said that Ed Bloom had developed the equipment in his Palm City plant and built it for $125,000 using insulation he described as optical fiber cloth to block heat without blocking light. He had a name for that cloth technology, Solar Guard. It was supposed to let the sunlight in and keep the heat out. More articles followed, with promises that the company was going to go public in the coming months and expanding to multiple facilities. Newspapers repeated Bloom's talking points. They told their readers that Future Farm used patented technology and proprietary nutrient formulas without pesticides. The new greenhouses were going to be made with shatter-resistant, thermally efficient material called Lexcan. Bloom boasted that his greenhouses were the Cadillac of the greenhouse industry. But most of it was smoke and mirrors. There was no patented technology, no fancy schmancy Lexcan or Solar Guard. It was all made up. He would eventually be arrested and convicted for selling worthless stocks and making false promises to investors. The man sold unregistered securities to investors who would eventually lose millions of dollars. Yes, millions. Bloom had mentioned his biology degree in one article, and that he had attended Kent State University in Ohio in another. He also mentioned, vaguely, some degree from London's Brentwick University. A quick search tells me there is no such place. However, there were diploma mills at the time that listed Brentwick University as one of their universities.
We provide degrees from a variety of universities in Europe. All degrees are legal and verifiable, which means when you show your diploma to your employer when you go for a job interview, he can call us, and we will confirm that you have completed the university of your choice, as long as it's on our list.
In the summer of 2003, it all came crashing down. He was sentenced to 5 years in the Florida Department of Corrections and 5 years standard felony probation with a hefty 20 years administrative probation to keep track of his just under $620,000 in restitution he owed to up to 65 investors. And that was only a small handful of the 1,200 people who had lost around $5 million. And just to confirm my suspicions that little was done in the way of fact-checking most of Ed Bloom's personal narrative, I first reached out to Kent State in Ohio to find out if he ever attended there. I gave them his name and his date of birth, and I received an email back from the school's Office of General Counsel. I was told that while he did attend a few quarters, fall, winter, and spring of '69, and the winter and spring of 1970, he was never awarded any degree by that university, and certainly not a master's degree, as he would allege years later on his 2011 Martin County felony plea form when he was arrested for violating his probation. When I learned about his recent criminal activity, I also learned that Ed Bloom had a LinkedIn profile which lists a master's in plant chemistry from Gothenburg University in Sweden. Ed Bloom says he attended from 1983 to 1986. So I contacted that university in Sweden. After extensive searching, they said, quote,
"We have searched for confirmation of the master's degree in plant chemistry, and we have not been able to find any record of education in this research field at Gotham University, nor the degree itself."
There was a guy here years back that came and interviewed me, that he was into this cold case thing and asked me a bunch of questions. I don't remember his name. We sat in here at the kitchen table, and he said something about Craig, that there was a one-sided conversation, and I guess it was something like, you stay the fuck away from my daughter, and now this was a weird story about that. I worked at the Booby Trap. It's an old It's not even there anymore.
Yeah, I remember.
It was like a topless bar.
Mm-hmm.
And I waitressed there, day shift. And I guess somehow Craig found out about it. And I was working. And I'd go up to the bar to get my drinks. And this guy was just sitting there. And he just looked weird. Like, weird. And he was just staring at me. And I was looking at him. And I'm like, that guy looks kind of familiar. And it went on. And then I looked at him, and I'm like, do I know you? He goes, oh, you know me. And he told me, he was like, your dad is in trouble. Somebody's trying to kill him. I'm like, what? He's telling me all these things. And I was freaking out a little bit. Yeah. So I drove out there when I got off work. And I told him, I said, all this. And he goes, that fool, he's crazy. And he kind of laughed it off. And then I was like, well, okay, well, this is what happened. And then after the fact, I guess, they had some type of something about when he said, stay away from me.
Had showed up at the trailer, and there was me and two other people there. And David said he was just going to have it out with him about him bothering all of us about this whole episode of the poisoning. So they both went into the trailer while we all stayed outside.
We could hear him arguing. Well, it was mostly David. He was just shouting the whole time in there, and it just was back and forth, yelling and shouting. Like I say, it was mainly David that you could hear, and you could hear him pretty good. But we didn't. We heard some of it, but we were talking amongst ourselves outside, up against the truck. So
David was telling him to, leave me alone, leave my wife alone, and leave his family. Just leave him alone and just stop all this nonsense, that he was going through about the poisoning and everything. Came out of the trailer embarrassed. You could see he was flushed. Came over and patted me on the back and just kind of joined in the conversation with us. And was kind of grinning. Okay. But he was embarrassed.
He was embarrassed.
And then David come out a little bit later. Now, later on, maybe the mosquitoes got bad. We all went in the trailer. We sat down. And we were kind of watching TV. And then he points at me, like he'd been sitting there thinking. He goes, and you know it's the truth.
So his friend says, what are you talking about, Craig?
It was about the poisoning. He says, you're being poisoned. You know it's true. And David turned around, I'm not telling you again. We just had an argument about this a while ago. He says, shut your mouth. I don't hear any more out of you about any of this. It was after the argument, maybe a week or so later. He says, Florida, he says, I can feel it. He's going to shoot me in the head. Do that because he would be the prime suspect. I said, everybody knows the bad blood between the two of you.
Here's the thing. David Ricketson told me if he came up dead, Craig did it. He goes, because me and him were buddies. Yeah, he doesn't just say that for the hell of it.
At the time that he told you that, when did he tell you that?
When I went out there, and he wasn't at the trailer, he was out in the hydroponic place. And I walked in there, and he looked at me, and we're talking about that, and he said, that damn Craig's starting to hang around a lot, And he sensed that I had heard enough about Craig. And he told me, I want you to know, if I come up dead, Craig did it. That's coming out of David Ricketson's mouth. I said, okay. And I think it was about 3 weeks later he was dead.
Many times he said he was going to get him, but the last time he was at our house was the Saturday before David died, and he said he was going to kill him.
This interview is with Craig's girlfriend, and it happened about 3 months before police would speak with him in that recorded interview that I played for you.
Of course I know about David Ricketson. I don't really know much about him. All I know is that they were trying to get back into a friendship, or at one occasion he was trying to get...
With the help of the transcript, I can see that she said, on one occasion him and Redacted both was trying to get Craig to go into a big deal. He would always come over, but I would always hear Craig say no. He wasn't going to do it because it was too big for him. He couldn't handle it.
Have you ever been out to David's house? You ever been out to?
No, David, he's the kind that he don't like black people. So that was mostly, I know that's mostly what they was fighting about. So, they were fighting, but they were, arguing about, me.
About
Him
you.
about him being with blacks, you know.
She said Craig was having trouble driving from being sick, so often David or other friends would come get him and bring him out to David's house, and David would sometimes bring his son with him. This is Jeanette's son.
Okay, did you ever hear mention talk he and David, possibly another fella in the nursery business, were trying to set up some kind of deal,
Yeah, he said
narcotics or something?
well, he was talking to me recently after. Well, I think David's stuff really took a toll to him because he sat down and he was talking to me, right? And he like almost in tears, and he goes, "Well, I told David it was too big." So then when David died or something, he was sitting down there and saying, "Well, I told David it was too big." That's all,
The detective asks her for the second time if she has ever taken Craig out to David's property, and she again says no. She's never been out there, she doesn't even know where David lives, and the murder occurred during a period where she and Craig were fighting, so they weren't even living together at the time.
I never kissed David out. Never kissed him out for David. Never. I don't even know what David did.
Out there in February?
I don't know. I really couldn't tell you because that was time he was fighting. So.
You went together. Okay, have you ever owned a small Toyota type car, fastback style, Datsun or anything like that?
No.
You know of anybody that does?
Not a fan. I don't. I owned a Dodge Onic, but I got rid of it. Like 5 or 6 years ago. No, 5 or 6 months ago.
Okay, what color was it?
White.
White. Had the luggage rack or anything?
No.
Mission to you since David's death or anything who you might think killed him?
The people he was in drugs with. The people that he made this big deal with. Because he would always say that the deal was too big. See, I told David the deal was too big.
Do you know anything about a gun, a .38 Rossi, that David supposedly owned at one time?
Yes, I do. I sold him the handgun.
This friend confirmed that David had given that .38 Rossi to Craig as collateral for a loan.
To my knowledge, the gun never came back. Because I even asked the question the last day that I seen David alive about the gun, and the gun hadn't returned.
Okay, now this is on the Friday before.
The Friday before David's death. He had not received it back.
Okay.
And finally he did say that David had paid off the money that he owed him, and he guessed he'd have to give the gun back to him, but he thought he'd hang on to it for a little while longer and let David wait for it like he had to wait for it.
Okay, did he ever mention to you about any ammunition that he bought or carried, his guns or anything like that?
He talked about some special kind of bullets
that explode on impact.
called, we thought glassers, but I guess they're called something else, and he said something about them being blue.
But you never saw any special bullets or...
Nope.
Both of them had these exploding tip bullets anyway, David told me that him and Craig was shooting stuff with these exploding tip bullets in a ditch somewhere. And David ran out of his bullets, and Craig said that he didn't want to shoot all his up.
It was interesting to learn that David was also known to use these particular Glaser bullets, but unfortunately, all that does is complicate things for police, because now they cannot only associate them with Craig.
He said Craig had went out there one time, and he asked him about his gun. He goes, "I forgot to bring it," like that. He goes, "Well, just bring it next time."
I asked him what happened to the gun, and he said that it had been stolen.
Okay, did he say from where?
Well, I think he told me that it was stolen out of the trunk of his car, that somebody had stolen his car, and they'd taken the gun and some other things out of his trunk, some bullets and whatever, when this, I was talking to him about
but he
this.
told you that gun, that Rossi had been stolen from
Yeah, he told me the gun had been stolen, definitely stolen. Because he knew that I knew the gun was never given back.
Since David's death, made any comments to you about maybe his involvement in it? Or?
No, every time that we talk about it, he says that there was some money that was taken from the property when the greenhouse was built, and these other people that David got involved with were to buy drugs, and they told David the drugs never came, and David never got any of them. And then he claims to me that he eventually found out and got mad at these people, and they eliminated him because of that. David had even told me there was an agreement that David more or less had cheated his dad because of the way they were using the money, but David said once they made money from the drugs, they'd put the money back to where Clyde would get the money back.
David told you this?
Yes, because David said, well, David was starving for money, then that was a way for them to get some spending money. But it never came about. Over a period of 4 or 5 months, David, I said, well, what happened with that? Oh, he says his brother got the drugs and got put in jail. The younger brother got put in jail somewhere on the way down with the drugs. I said, David, this guy has suckered you just like he suckered you building this greenhouse. I said, I don't know why you're so gullible to these people, but I don't think those drugs ever came.
He says, I don't think those drugs ever came, and I think that money went into Ed's pocket.
And, it's a possibility, these people something like that could have happened, but that's what he keeps telling me.
He told me about some great big deal that had gone bad that had something to do with some of the money that was set aside for the rest of the payment of the greenhouse. That money had not been stolen. It had been used as part of a big drug deal, and they lost it. They all got their heads together and decided to say the builder of the greenhouse stole it to cover up the fact that it was a drug thing. But anyway, he told me not to tell anybody what he told me that day because he would know that I was the one that said it. And I never did. I was afraid of him.
So this was someone, a male, who had known Craig since 1969. They became friends in junior college and had a common interest in bodybuilding. He described Craig once asking him to purchase some ammunition for him. Craig gave this friend a written list and where he could purchase it. The ammo he purchased at Craig's request was called Glazer Pack that included 6 or 8 of the actual bullets. He said the owner of the store at the time rang him up and said,
Boy, you sure are planning to do a good job on somebody with this.
Now this witness wasn't familiar with the ammunition, so he just laughed it off, and then he went home, where Craig met him to retrieve the bullets. He said that Craig told him he'd planned on getting even with people that he thought had sacrificed their friendship with him, and he was going to do this in whatever way he deemed necessary, even if it meant killing them. One of these people was David Ricketson. He said this was in the early fall of '89, so 3 or 4 months before the murder. Then, the day after David's murder, this witness got a call from a female friend who told him that David had been killed, and she named someone that had allegedly been arrested under suspicion of murder. Someone else, not Craig. Now, there's nothing in the reports that I received that shows anyone ever being arrested, but this guy goes to the gym that same day, and who shows up but Craig, looking, according to him, disheveled, as if he had experienced an uneasy night or morning. So he says to Craig, I heard a crazy story. Craig, he said, looked at him with a silly grin, and when this guy tells him that he heard David Ricketson was killed, and named the person that he heard had been picked up as a suspect, Craig's reply was to smile and say, They tried to pick me up and pin it on me, but they ain't smart enough. This was the day that David's body was recovered. About 5 months later, he's at the Orange Avenue gym again, and he sees Craig, and he approaches him, because now he's heard that Craig has been spreading rumors that he and other people they knew had committed some kind of sadistic plot to kill him. It was ludicrous, and he told Craig as much. He said, I heard some crazy rumors you're spreading about me. What's on your mind? I want this out in the open. And Craig said, You know what I'm talking about. This guy said, No, I don't. So Craig rattles off several other names of their friends and associates and accuses him and them of plotting to kill him. That, he told Craig, is the most absurd thing that I've ever heard in my life. No, it's not, Craig said. You know it's true, and I'm going to get you. So this witness said, You're wrong, but you need to know right now, I am not afraid of you. And Craig looks at him and smiles, and then he says, Neither was David Ricketson. One friend with a long-standing grudge, a business partner who allegedly ran off with a shitload of David's money, and a friend whose wife David is sleeping with. As you can see, we have literally covered every one of the main reasons for murder. Love, money, revenge. There were suspects for each of those among David's closest associates. When I spoke to some of David's friends, they repeatedly told me that there was a lot going on in David's life. There were many possibilities, many tangents that police could have gone down. In Craig's first unrecorded interview, he told police that David approached him about 7 or 8 months before his death about wanting to get him in on a drug deal that involved David and Ed Bloom, and they wanted his help in either backing or distribution. He refused, he said. Craig further told police that David had lost a lot of money in the deal, to Ed, and about a kilo of coke. He knew the money had been taken from an account set up by Clyde Ricketson, and it was about $20,000 or $30,000. Craig said Clyde believed that Ed had stolen the money from the account, but the truth was that Ed had beaten David out of the money in the big drug venture. Now remember, this interview where he told police that was only 6 days after the murder, and Craig was the only witness who told police that full story about the drug deal in his first interview. All of the others were pointing to Craig and his long-standing grudge and his threats to get back at people. So 6 days afterward, when most of the other people weren't even aware of Ed Bloom and that drug deal, Craig knew about it. Craig knew that it was stolen from the account, and he knew that Ed had beaten him out of it. And how would he know that? So David has got this guy from his past back in his life because of this deal that goes downhill when his buddy Ed fucks him over. And I want you to understand that Ed Bloom was only physically in David's life for a few months. He talks about them being awfully close, but according to him, he met him in March. In April and May, there were already plans for the nursery, and in June and July, supplies were being delivered, and the nursery was being built. It all happened pretty fast. And then, pretty quickly before August, Ed left town. And yet Craig is still hanging around, acting increasingly paranoid and making David's life, and those around him, very uncomfortable. Not long before the murder, David and Craig got in a loud argument inside David's trailer after David learned that Craig had been bothering his parents, bothering his daughter, bothering his friends, all about this absurd poisoning conspiracy. Jeanette said that she brought Craig out to David's property at David's request sometime in April. And she too, according to her, had only in the months before his death come back into his life after he reached out to her through a mutual friend. So David is reaching out to 2 people that were known to deal drugs, which obviously brings me to David's motive for reaching out to Craig and Jeanette after all that time. Let me put on my skeptic's hat and suggest that David knew Craig sold drugs, and according to his friends, he did. And by this time, he didn't really need a friend. What he needed was someone with the contacts and ability to distribute all the stuff that he had hoped they were going to get. And selling it from the property certainly wouldn't fly, with his parents' ever watchful gaze upon him. David needed someone else to offload those drugs for him, and I'm pretty confident in saying that he would not have trusted Jeanette to do it. Not the heavy lifting, maybe a little here and there, but it's never a wise decision to hand over a bunch of drugs to sell to someone who does drugs. That's a good way to lose a lot of your product. He wouldn't have needed to reach out to Craig if he thought Jeanette could do the job. So, for a moment, let's take Craig at his word, that he told David he was not interested in this deal once David proposed it to him, and further take his girlfriend's word, that Craig said the deal was too big. $20,000 is a big deal for sure, and this is a reasonable assumption because Craig was paranoid at that time. He clearly did not trust David, and the reason being is that it's possible what he initially thought was an old friend reaching out to bury the hatchet turned very quickly into David wanting him to do a drug deal, and maybe that didn't sit well with Craig. But he also can't quite escape the lure of being back in David's circle. They did have some mutual friends, a couple of them. So Craig continues coming out to the nursery property like these other friends do, doing target practice with David, hanging out, and obviously supplying David coke in there as well. By the end of 1989, the holidays, Ed's gone, Colin's gone, and so is David's money. But he's still got a nursery to deal with, so he hires John to help him, and that's when the crack problem begins. David is despondent. He's fighting with his family, and he is doing more drugs than he should be. One of David's friends told me, in one of their last conversations a couple weeks before the murder, David said that he had finally figured out what the whole nursery thing was about. Essentially, he told his friend,
I can't make any money selling this lettuce. I'd need way more of it. Bloom conned me into doing this, and it's just a show place to con other people, to bring them out and show them the place and sell this whole idea to a bunch of other people.
And within Colin's interview, there is a statement that tends to corroborate that.
The last time I saw him was about 3 weeks before he was killed. I visited the farm with some people who were interested in buying the greenhouse.
And it's also worth reminding you that Colin and Ed essentially blamed each other for the missing money, and both of them stopped coming around before the nursery was even finished. One of the things that I look at when I'm researching multiple persons of interest are their individual stakes at the time of the homicide. For Craig, if he killed David, his motive was essentially revenge for past and present slights. If Ed Bloom had something to do with David's death, his motive might have been something more than financial. First, David knew the truth about his part in their failed drug deal and that missing money. Also remember there was a lien put on the Ricketson property, in addition to Ed Bloom receiving that default judgment and being made legally responsible for that bill. David didn't want his parents knowing he was part of the reason that money was gone. So if David lied to his dad about not knowing anything about the stolen money and Ed got sued for it, that's another pretty good motive for murder. Ed was in the middle of dealing with a felony charge in another county for which the legal judgment he received after not paying bills related to David's nursery would have been problematic. That would have put Ed at risk of violating his felony probation for the Pinellas County offense, and that could have potentially led to jail time. Ed Bloom had a strong motive to keep these cases from converging too closely. But there was one other pretty important thing that I learned from one of David's friends who admitted that he had not told police, and I think it ratchets up the stakes for Ed Bloom even further. David told one of his friends, one of the last times that they spoke, not long before he was killed, that he, David, had driven out to Ed's property and shot a .30-30 rifle round into his trailer, a home that Ed lived in with his wife and child. David, this witness said, was pissed at being screwed out of all that money. He couldn't go through the proper legal channels to get that money back, but he sure as hell could scare the shit out of Ed.
The only reason that I didn't go back to that job was because I discussed it with my wife. I told her about David's cocaine use. She knew how bad I used to be, and I just said, there's no way I can go back. I approached David and I told him this. I said, David, unless all this bullshit stops, I said, I can't come back there to work. It's too dangerous for me. I'm going to lose my wife. I'll lose my kid. I'll lose everything. I can't do it. And besides, I'm drinking too much with you already. And I was. I mean, we were drinking a case of beer every other day or something, you know. And it was just, it was getting ruthless. I let my own farm go to hell. It was a whole bad time. So I told David, unless everything to turn around and everything stopped, that I wasn't going to come back. And I also told him that I was going to why I wasn't going back, you know, because of his cocaine use. David told me if I ever that, he said he'd kill me. He'd beat me up. He said he'd beat the piss out of me. So I just said I'm not going back there. And I told David at the time I don't have any ill feelings toward him. I don't want any hassle with him. I must confess I was very scared because he was getting a little crazy, and I thought that he was going to come over and kill me, or do something to me, or wreck my greenhouse or something. So
the problem for me is that it doesn't appear that Ed told police about this little incident, about having a rifle round shot through his trailer, and that's an intentional exclusion. I really do appreciate you talking to me about this. I know it's not...
Oh, I appreciate somebody taking some interest.
Oh, I'm glad.
Honestly, I mean, I let it go years ago. I just had to, and kind of in my brain, I feel like, that they'll pay one day, we're all going to be judged one day. The ultimate judgment, and I just feel like, but it's unfair. I've had 3 kids, and now I'm fixing to have a grandchild, and he never got to me. Never did it, robbed me. And his parents, it was just awful losing your kid like that,
Yeah.
My grandmother, it just ate at her every day, and then she lost her other son.
I read
2
that.
years later.
Ugh.
Yeah. And
Awful.
it was she just was a shell of a person. She didn't it was hard. I took care of her in the end, but she didn't go outside. She didn't want to go anywhere. Didn't want to be around anybody except for me. It ate at her every day, every single day.
If you have any information about the murder of David Ricketson, please call the Lake County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team at 352-343-9529. Or you can email them directly at coldcase@lcso.org. You can also call Crimeline at 800-423-TIPS. That's 800-423-8477. You can also contact me directly at deckerjenny@gmail.com.